Okay, hi. Hey. I'm gonna be trying out a new thing where I talk about a few of the books that I read in the first quarter of 2022. I'm gonna be talking about 5 books, but really 3 books in detail, and I'm gonna sandwich those 3 books by their rating, like the 2 buns, the 2 outer pieces of bread. Were 5-star reads, and you're gonna have to find out what the one in the middle, what the lunch meat is. Okay. Okay, let's start with this first book is The Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison. Our protagonist, Maya, is the half-goblin, half-elf son of an elven emperor, born out of a marriage of convenience. He's shunned from the Empire and largely forgotten until unforeseen circumstances, which I won't spoil here, lead to him being crowned the new emperor. He's that pair of Hello Kitty underwear your friends bought you as a gag, but now it's laundry day and they're all you have to wear. It's much more character-focused than plot-focused. There's a lot of talking, which I enjoyed, but which I know others, those adrenaline junkies of you, might not so much. There's a lot to do with court life and courtiers and etiquette and using the royal we. As in, we are uncomfortable having armed bodyguards watch us sleep, and we would like to use the little emperor's room. But as a character study, I found the characters, Maya in particular, engaging to read about. Some very minor spoilers ahead, but nothing that should really affect your enjoyment if you should choose to read it. He's got this whole outsider thrown into a role they've had no training for arc, and I think it does its job at eliciting sympathy. Seeing the black sheep son who might have died in exile given unimaginable power overnight makes you root for the underdog. If you ignore the fact that we're talking about a monarchy here, but watching his progression, his acclimation to the culture, and his position in said culture made for an enjoyable read. I definitely had strong feelings for the side characters. Maya's allies, obviously, and I'll get back to them, but I even found Maya's cousin, Setherus, his guardian and abuser, interesting. For several reasons, but mostly because he's not made into a one-dimensional villain, which isn't true for all the bad guys in this book, but also I was fine with, some of the bad guys being a little light on character. But as for his allies, his assistant, Civet, and his Nohechere, which, okay, so, the very big thing about this book is the names. There are a lot of letters, and they are difficult to pronounce. You might want to keep a little notepad with the names and who does what. I highlighted them in my Kindle, but your mileage may vary. I do think the spelling and pronunciation difficulties in the names and titles has a purpose in the book. You relate more to Maya and his being thrust into unfamiliar territory. You really get it. Right, but Maya's interactions with his assistant Civet and his Nohechere, which are the armed bodyguards I mentioned earlier, are some of my favorite moments in the book. The book's not grim by any means, but it definitely provided some much appreciated levity and humanity. Overall, I loved it. I gave it the full 5 stars, baby! Okay, next, The Maid by Nita Prose. This book I liked just fine. In it, a maid, the maid, Maid Molly, who is never apart from her trolley. She scrapes and she scrubs like a stand-up maid does till one day she finds a dead body. And thus begins our mystery, which was fine. Most of my interest in this book, however, came from spending time with Molly. Her specific condition is never named, but she's clearly neurodivergent, and it colors her interactions with people and the world at large. I can't speak to whether it was good representation necessarily, but I connected to the character. I've seen people call it quirky, in the disparaging way, which I can see, I guess, but I found it more sad than anything, and I think some of that has to do with how you read Molly. On whether you find the blank, confused looks people respond to her with humorous or painful. I thought the way this book looked at not being understood and finding people who'll try to understand was nice and hopeful even. There will be people who'll try to understand, and I liked that. But the mystery, yes, the mystery, it was, as I've said, fine. Without giving away too many spoilers, I enjoyed the bit just before the end where things kick up and there are a lot more moving parts. But the conclusion itself was very especially the reveal in the epilogue, very The thing is, the secondary mystery had lots of hints throughout, so that when it all comes to light, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, the primary mystery of who done it though was kinda like a Beyonce album. It comes out of nowhere. Overall though, I liked The Maid. It was an enjoyable read. It wasn't like an all-time favorite or anything, but I'm glad I read it. 3.5 stars for The Maid. And for the last of the for the bottom bun in the sandwich, top bun? How does the sandwich work? And how are we constructing this sandwich? Bottom to top makes most sense. So for the top bun of this weird monstrosity, we're talking about Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. Crooked Kingdom is the sequel to Six of Crows, and the two form a duology. Though they're really more like one long story, you'd absolutely need to read the first book before the second, and probably you want to read them right after one another, though, to be honest, I didn't. If you haven't read either this or Six of Crows, which I'm sure is a minority of you given how popular the series and the Grishaverse generally are, it's a YA duology centered around this group of uniquely skilled, traumatized teenage badasses called the Dregs, led by anti-hero Kaz, who is also a traumatized teenager. In as few words and giving away as little as possible, the first book is a heist story. I've seen Ocean's 11 comparisons, and the second picks up right after the first, so they really are best read together. It's got this Victorian steampunky vibe, and it's pretty grim as far as YA goes. Interestingly, the Goblin Emperor also had steampunk elements with airships and steam-powered drawbridges, but anyway, I quite liked that aspect of the series, which might have to do with why I prefer the sequel, Crooked Kingdom. I very much liked Six of Crows and gave it 4 stars, but it was the setting, the characters, and their sometimes complicated friendships that I really liked, and felt those really got a chance to shine in the sequel. Ultimately, I had a lot of fun with the series, and I'll probably be watching the Netflix show Shadow and Bone. The possibility of me reading the earlier Grishaverse books, though, is kind of slim. I've seen some complaints that the characters read as 10 to 15 years older than they're meant to be, and speculation that the series began as one for adults and Bardugo and or their publisher aged the characters down to appeal to YA readers. I understand the criticism, and to be clear, not everyone who points it out is necessarily bothered by it. Like, I noticed, but I didn't really, I was mostly fine with it. Especially because by the second book, they feel more like teenagers. There are a couple reasons for that, but yeah, they felt much more like teenagers to me in the second book. The series looks at grief and the different ways it manifests in acceptance and denial and vengeance. So many POVs was probably a lot to juggle, but I admire Bardugo's work here. None of the perspectives felt superfluous, and each felt sufficiently distinct. There's rarely a dull moment. Even once things slow down and the characters are just hanging out and nothing's exploding, which sometimes things do. Shout out to Wylan. Anyway, I loved it. Loved the relationships, both the individual friendships like the one between Nina and Inej, and the collective group dynamic, as well as the romantic relationships, which were featured economically enough for me to find satisfying without being overbearing or anything. I liked the diversity, even if it occasionally bordered on stereotypical. I loved the Grisha magic system and its types and subtypes, and I loved seeing disabled characters as heroes. The 5 stars. It got 5 stars from me. That's going to be all the books that I talk about in detail, but I do want to talk about 2 more books, both of which I gave 5 stars to, so, spoiler, I guess. But I'm not going to summarize them because I feel like they're both best read with no prior knowledge going in. That's how I read them, and I feel like I might have liked them. I probably still would have liked them a lot, but I might have liked them a tad bit less if I'd known anything going in. Which I don't know. Some people might criticize, but I liked going into these books not knowing anything, and so I'm going to tell you very little about them. But the names of the books. First, Jane Doe by Victoria Helen Stone. I liked what Jane Doe had to say. I appreciated its gumption. I thought it was funny and a little gritty. And also The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, which I thought had a unique perspective, which is all I'll say. It's really worth going into both these books not knowing anything, I think. I think that's all the books that I wanted to talk about today. If you're still here, I'm sorry, but also thank you. And tell me down in the comments below, what were your favorite reads of the first third of our year? Oh God, a third of the year's gone. What were your favorite reads? Have you read any of these books? If you have, let's talk about them. If you are interested in reading any of them, let me know. Let me know also if there are any other books you plan on reading in the next 2/3 of the year. If you liked this video, giving it a like always helps. And if you're not subscribed, what are you doing? Hit the subscribe button. Or don't. I don't want to pressure you. But thank you. You guys are awesome. You're awesome. And you know who else is awesome? My patrons, who are listed on the screen right now. They're awesome to a dangerous degree. I'm afraid of them, and I love them. Okay, bye.